Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to our special transmission on the speech of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan. He addressed the 74th session of the UNGA, where he highlighted some very important issues. He talked about the climate change and its effects, the current one as well as the future ones. He also talked about another very important factor, and that was about the money laundering and how the poorer countries are getting poorer because their money is taken away in the form of billions and billions of dollars, or people buy properties through these offshore companies or the tax-free havens basically, and the Western world gets richer. That's something very important, and in that, terror financing is taking place, and so many other issues are also created because of that. Then he also spoke about something very important, very close to almost every single Muslim in the world. As we all know, Islam is a religion of peace and love primarily, but this Islamophobia, this concept, has been created willingly or unwillingly. But post 9/11 things have changed. Now the differences are getting more. When we talk about love, peace and harmony, this is where the problem seems to be. How to knit these people together rather than creating more problems for them was another very important issue. Last but not the least was about Kashmir. The Prime Minister, I think for the first time or after a very long time, in my memory at least, I've been in media for the last 20 years, I think for the first time the Kashmir issue was properly raised, proper homework was done, and the way it was presented, I think even Modi is thinking on other lines as well as we speak. Because the point is that he in fact told the entire world that this is an indigenous, homegrown movement for the right of self-determination. This is what the United Nations in fact promised these poor Kashmiri people. But what is happening at the moment? As we speak, this is the 53rd day, sir. The 53rd day has started today, since the curfew has been imposed there. More than 13,000 youngsters have been picked up by the law enforcement agencies there, and God knows where they are. According to reports, they're all over in India because the jails do not have enough space in Kashmir. So you can well imagine what's going on out there. Prime Minister also mentioned about the rape of 11,000 women in Kashmir. He also mentioned about the killing of 100,000 people, innocent Kashmiris. And he also spoke about the presence of 900,000, that is close to 1 million. I'll repeat, close to 1 million soldiers only deployed in Kashmir to make life hell for those 8 million poor Kashmiris. So you can well imagine, we'll be talking about that in detail in our program. But let me introduce you to our panelists first, and then we'll also highlight and we'll talk about these various important points. We have with us on my right is Brigadier retired Tipu Sultan Sahab, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much, sir. And we have with us Kamar Chima Sahab, again needs no introduction, is a senior foreign affairs expert. Sir, thank you very much. And we've also been joined in by the Deputy Director of Asia Pacific Program and also a South Asian expert, Michael Kugelman. He's online with us at the moment as we speak. Michael, thank you very much for taking out your time and joining us in our program. Michael, first of all, let me come to you and ask you this question about the Prime Minister's speech. Obviously, he did not only talk about the Pakistani issues, but he in fact talked about the international issues. For example, climate change, Islamophobia, as well as terror financing and the money laundering issue. And on top, last but not the least, was about the Kashmiri people, about the right for self-determination. But earlier, he did touch upon the human rights violations going on in the occupied Kashmir by the Indians. Your take, Michael Kugelman.
So I thought it was actually a very strong speech by Imran Khan. I thought it got off on a very strong note by bringing attention to some of the major challenges that are shared and faced by the world on the whole, climate change and corruption. And then he didn't jump into Kashmir right away. He built the case by talking at length about Islamophobia and how the world tends not to look at some of the abuses visited upon Muslims around the world. And then he came to the Kashmir issue, which, as we could have expected, was a very passionate call for action on the Kashmir case. So I thought that it was a very strong speech, and I think that Imran Khan did the right thing by pitching the Kashmir issue or trying to get attention to the Kashmir issue, certainly by emphasizing the humanitarian crisis, but also by talking about the stability risks. I think that the world, and particularly the West, is more likely to give attention to an issue like Kashmir when it starts to hear about the risk of war and even nuclear war if the world does not do enough to try to resolve the dispute. I think that could really get more traction, and in that regard, I think that Prime Minister Khan did the right thing. I mean, I don't think I would want to overstate the threat, perhaps not overstate it in the way that he did, but certainly I think that's an important way to describe this problem, not only as a humanitarian crisis. We all know what's happening there in J&K right now, but also the fact that if it's not dealt with, if the world doesn't take more of an interest in trying to address the crisis, then you have the very real risk of a war. And I think that's an important message for Imran Khan to deliver to a global audience, and particularly key Western capitals.
Since you spoke about the global audience, let's focus on the Kashmir issue. Now, we all know what's going on out there, Michael. When you talk about the atrocities committed by the presence of 900,000 troops out there in the Indian-occupied Kashmir, we all know what's going on, how people are being picked up, tortured, killed, brutally injured. They are blinded. You all know what is going on. Do you think this particular speech on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly would sort of persuade or put some sort of pressure on India to A, maybe give some sort of relaxation in the curfew, or maybe some sort of a proper engagement with the people so that their misery comes to an end, sir?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that India would be susceptible to that kind of pressure. I think that India will lift the lockdown at a time of its choosing, and it could be quite some time before that happens, unfortunately. However, I think that we should be emboldened by some of the messaging coming from Washington. Just a few hours before Imran Khan's speech, in which you had Alice Wells, a top South Asia official at the State Department, issue a statement which basically called on India to lift the lockdown. And that's a much stronger message than we have been hearing from the State Department in previous weeks, when the State Department was basically saying, oh, India needs to operate with more restraint there. But only now, only today, do we have this call from the U.S. government for India to lift the blockade, or to lift the lockdown. And to have the speech to have Alice Wells' comments, and then to have this very passionate speech by Imran Khan, it's a pretty strong 1-2 punch, and it will certainly put more pressure on India, even though, as I said, I think it's unlikely to be susceptible to that type of pressure, no matter how much it may build.
Last question, Michael, to you. After listening to today's speech, and I'm sure you must have been following Khan also for the last week or so, and you must have been listening to him wherever he's been speaking, or maybe addressing the journalist for that matter. Do you think Imran Khan has today emerged as an international leader? If not an international, at least a Muslim leader who presented the Muslim issues in a very adequate manner, sir, very appropriately, I would say?
No, I would certainly say, I have my fair share of criticisms for Imran Khan, but I do think that he has distinguished himself on the world stage in a way that we have not seen from top Pakistani leaders in quite some time. As you'll recall, he had a very successful visit to Washington not too long ago, where he really won over Washington in many cases. He just won a lot of support in that regard, and that continued with his time in New York. He had a series of meetings with a range of people, significant people, George Soros, for example. And I think that shows that he has that type of drawing power, where he's able to get meetings with some of the most influential folks in the world, not just in terms of diplomatic levels, but the likes of a George Soros type. And I do think that his speech went over well. Certainly there has been some criticism in these parts, including in Washington, that it was sort of focused too much on grievances and victimization. That certainly is true. But I do think that it made a good impression. And it seems like every Pakistani prime minister, whichever Pakistani figure gives Pakistan's speech at the UNGA each year, everyone talks about Kashmir. But I do think that Imran Khan, articulated Pakistan's case and its concerns about Kashmir in a more emphatic and passionate way, in a more convincing way than we've seen from a Pakistani leader in quite some time. So I give him credit and kudos for that.
All right, Michael, thank you very much for your comments and for your participation in our show. So if you allow me, we've been just joined in by Mishal Malik also. And the lady is a senior Hurriyat leader and the wife of Yasin Malik, who is fighting this, I would say, the war for the freedom, for the struggle, for the Kashmiri people. Thank you very much, Mishal, for taking your time out and talking to us. First of all, Mishal, I think everyone, whether you talk about any political party or any Pakistani or anyone from any age group, from any sect, from any walk of life, they've all praised Khan Saab's speech today. Now, your take, ma'am, on this particular point, do you think he
I
was able
welcome
to
his
raise this
speech. It was
Kashmir
straight from
issue
the heart.
in an
Yeah.
adequate manner the way you wanted?
Yes, there was elegance. It was articulate. It was very emotional. Yet it was very, very realistic. The way he spoke openly about the crisis that is going on in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that they are being treated worse than animals, and it reminded me of Maneka Gandhi, that if anybody attacked any dog, even in India, they would be in prison for 7 years. But when it comes to Kashmiri people, the human lives, they don't matter, because basically because they're Muslims. They're being targeted for being Muslims, the majority Muslim state, which is not a part of India. It wants its right to self-determination. That is the only sane solution to it. So hats off to Imran Khan for representing the true sentiments of our people. And it was an extraordinary speech in extraordinary circumstances. So, every year, Pakistan's Prime Minister, whosoever it is, they advocate the cause of Kashmiris, the pulse. But right now, we are in such a vulnerable, in such a weak situation that entire nation is literally starving to death. These are the curfew chambers, just like Hitler's gas chambers, and the entire leadership has been banned, locked up, and especially my husband, who is not just in any jail, he's in Tihar death cell, and he's being tortured by the Indian state authorities, by the NIA. So for me, it's a very, very crucial time, personally and also for our nation, because any nation succeeds if there's a leader. So if they want to make our movement leaderless, so the responsibility falls upon the Pakistani state, from the prime minister, and to send our message across to the world, because right now we're completely voiceless. There's a complete clampdown on communications, on internet, and there's a blanket ban on everything. We don't have a right to eat or drink water. We
All
are
right.
burying our loved ones within our homes, and we don't have a right to live, to educate, to anything. All right, our right to identity has been snatched, and we don't know how long this curfew will go on. But it was a powerful speech, and now the ball is in the court of the international world, especially the UN. That's where
In fact,
our real
absolutely, Michelle,
solution
spot on. And he
lies.
did mention that the UN has failed, basically. He did not use the word failed, but wasn't that, I would say, powerful enough to sort of persuade India to get either on the negotiation table and talk or otherwise. But, ma'am, today's speech was great. This is what we've been hearing so far. In your opinion, ma'am, whenever we talk, I mean, there are a lot of grievances from the Hurriyat leaders and the Kashmiri leaders as well, that maybe Pakistan is not presenting the case in a wise manner. Sometimes we heard that even the PM was told to put that paragraph in their speech. I'm talking about the previous governments. But do you think this man has delivered what all you wanted, and this man has presented the case of Kashmir in an absolute appropriate manner,
Yeah,
and I would say
this is the
amicably
first phase.
well, in a
Yeah,
way
yes.
that at least people might listen to what he has been saying?
The takeoff was powerful. It was very, very eloquently explained to the international world leaders. It's the most powerful forum of the world, UN General Assembly. But the problem is now the game starts. Now it depends on how powerfully, how actively, how rigorously Pakistan is going to come forward with a full-fledged policy on internationalizing the Kashmir issue and annexing it with the global peace, because this is not just about Kashmiris, Pakistan, and the Indians. Right now, it's a nuclear ticking time bomb, and this is a ceasefire line. Where is the LOC now? Line of control. So this is a jungle law going on, and the Indian side, they are at a full-fledged war mood. They have already started a full-fledged war on defenseless, unarmed Kashmiris, but it's moving forward ahead
All right.
towards Azad Kashmir and Akhand Bharat of Gilgit-Baltistan. So this is heading towards a nuclear micro exchange, which can engulf the entire world. And I agree how pertinently the Prime Minister of Pakistan mentioned the impacts of a nuclear exchange and how it's going to affect the global world, the global population, global famine. We can destroy the entire planet. Environment is linked directly with
Correct.
the ozone layer, with agriculture,
All
with
right.
growth. Everything will be wiped out.
All right. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Michelle, for your comments. Grace up. You heard what Mr. Kugelman said. You heard what the lady just spoke about. Now, everybody believes that he presented the case of Kashmir, and he did talk about Islamophobia, the climate change, the money laundering issues in a very, very decent manner. body language was amazing, and he was talking from his heart, wasn't using any paper, and he went on for 47 minutes, sir, unlike Modi for 7 minutes. Your take?
What a speech, my word. It is going to reverberate in the corridors of United Nations for a long time. And this is a speech which every Muslim in the world wanted to hear. I would go on to say that everybody in the world wanted to know what Imran Khan said in this speech. And in the arena of international leadership, where there are no big leaders of high stature as compared to the bygone days, I think Imran Khan came out tall and distinguished. This speech was an epilogue or a crowning moment for Imran Khan's visit to the United Nations and the United States. And if you look at his engagements prior to this speech also, they were phenomenal. I mean, he has been saying things, and he has been attracting the international media in the manner that no other leader in my recent memory has, from Pakistan or third world, has attracted the media so much. Everybody was running, New York Times, Washington Post,
He was in the limelight.
The think tank organizations, limelight. Everybody wanted to talk to him, and he went on to say that while the Americans were pouring money into Afghan war, the Chinese were developing the infrastructure in the third world. And here in New York, the car was bumping, "This is your infrastructure," and everybody laughed out. So I think this speech will go a long way in setting the pace in the subcontinent for any future effort. One thing is very clear, Faisal, and that is that no matter you can have thousands of diplomatic efforts, but one charismatic leader with character can get up and change everything, obliterate everything else against the falsehood, and the truth is visible in the United Nations after Modi and after Imran Khan's speech. What is falsehood? Based on extremism, hatred, arson, looting, killing, raping. And here is a man with the character and vision who wants to tell you to be human beings.
You think Khan overshadowed
Be a
Modi?
human being and do not be a shaitan. If you are a shaitan, it's going to go nowhere. It's not going to help you. And this is what we wanted to hear.
He asked people to Google RSS.
He said,
And he said Modi is a life member.
A life member
RSS.
of that, and it's based on the Nazi theory and all that. I think the millions of Indians would be thinking tonight very hard. And if Imran Khan is number one leader being followed on the Google, I think 1 billion Indians have got a lot to do in that, making him number one. They want to know. They know Imran Khan from cricket fields to all other philanthropy efforts that he is doing.
Then you also need to look at his political vision.
His political vision is come out in his own. He has been withstanding that nonsense and that poor response from the Indians when he said that I want peace with you. And this is what the Indians had driven the great Imran Khan to, and they got it what they wanted.
And this extremism is going to engulf the entire India, and they have got no clue. Shima Saab.
Well, sir, I was just, when Prime Minister Modi spoke at the UN, he said that we gave Buddha to the world and not Yudh. It means that we are not going to give fight but peace. But I was just searching the UNESCO website. Buddha was born in Nepal, in Lumbini. He was not born in India.
Yes, he wasn't.
So he is trying to portray himself, a leader, a person who was born in Nepal. He's trying to cash his values and trying to tell the world that
I just give you another example, sir. So when
That
you,
was
when you
national
enter this
embarrass-
Human Rights Commission of UN in Geneva, right about not a furlong, maybe is more, about 60, 70 meters before that, there is this huge statue of none other than Gandhi Sahib. We also respect him, Gandhi. And who killed Gandhi?
Yes.
People should also know
Imran
that
Khan
it
told
wasn't any
today.
Muslim.
Yes.
It was a Hindu from the RSS,
RSS.
who killed. Yes, sir.
So I think that was a national embarrassment for him, that he's trying to cash in those values which do not belong to India. So and above all, Prime Minister Modi also spoke about multilateralism. All the 4 points which Prime Minister Imran Khan has discussed come under the purview of the multilateralism. And if Prime Minister Modi says that we should bring in multilateralism in global politics, then Kashmir was a multilateral issue. It was at the multilateral forum. We both the countries took there, and from multilateral forum you have brought it to bilateral, and from bilateral you have taken it to unilateral, and now you are saying that we need to resolve things through at a multilateral forum. I think there is a lot of there is a difference between actions and words, and there is a hypocrisy in Indian leadership, and the word I've seen. So all what matters at the moment is that all those 4 points were discussed. I think the Indians were very much critical of the Prime Minister that he will just go for anti-India bashing and he will say nothing in his speech. But all the 4 points, be it the money laundering, no,
all
I think
international
global
issues.
leader, no global leader might have ever discussed this money laundering as a critical issue for developing countries, because that takes the money.
It sucks the money out from
it's-
the poor countries. Get money goes directly either through businesses or
Exactly.
through wrong means to the international world.
He
where the-
told them, why don't you test it?
Exactly, because
And
that
he
doesn't
says
suit
that the
the
West does
SPL.
not have an infrastructure, does not have infrastructure. There are not proper legal avenues,
All
and
right.
if we have to get we have to pay the heavy fees for the lawyers. So I think money laundering. No one has ever discussed this issue at global forum, and above all, Islamophobia. No Muslim country in last 20 years
Ever
after
spoke about
9/11,
it?
nobody
This-
tried to make.
Muslims suffered the most because of this so-called Islamophobia and the non-state actors, which unfortunately represented Islam. Now, Chimasab, if you allow me, I'll just come back to you. We've also been joined by Saeed Mohammed Ali from USA, who's a senior analyst. Saeed Mohammed Ali Sahab, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, sir, for taking out your time on a very busy day. Now, sir, first of all, your take. How do you see the speech of the Prime Minister Khan today at the UNGA, sir?
So, Faisal, I also, do think that certainly, I mean, if we look at the last 40 years of history, it was certainly charismatic, articulate, without having to rely on written material. So, all the optics were good. Thematically, it was also comprehensive in the sense that, discussed tax havens, yes, climate, certainly a very important issue for our part of the world with long-standing implications. With climate, though, I mean, just a small caveat that yes, I mean, our ecological footprint is insignificant, but I mean, if we do look at our reliance on dirty energy, I mean, we have been trying sporadically and perhaps haven't, gotten a lot of international support, but I mean, we are also coal dependent, and there are many pollution-related issues that we can do something about as a country. And forestation is perhaps, one of the more encouraging trends in recent years on the fighting pollution, at least domestically within our borders. Now, when it came to Islamophobia, I mean, just because of the virtue of where people like me sit and the interactions that we have with the wider sort of international community. With Islamophobia, Pakistan has a tougher sell because, I mean, when it comes to protection of the rights of minorities, we hardly have an unblemished record. Turning to perhaps the strategically most important issue, which is the Kashmir issue, it was certainly quite interesting, and strategically useful to accentuate, this long-standing problematic history of the RSS. And it is perhaps, this current dire situation has provided, Pakistan an opportunity to also reinterpret and challenge the narrative that India has been trying to spin about shining India, and India is the largest democracy in the world with a natural alliance to countries like the US. To point out how this kind of majoritarianism, has kind of, come to dominate India, particularly in the last 15, 20 years, and now with the second, election of Mr. Modi. I mean, people are wary when they see comparisons between him and Hitler, for instance, because what Hitler did is now a fact of history, and although there might be posturing. So it was interesting how he referred to this situation, this kind of ominous situation in 1939. So that was particularly effective, kind of seeing that. However, I'll also I'll agree with Michael Kugelman's, him pointing out how already amongst U.S. policymakers, Alice Wells, for instance, has signaled, in which shows the impact of this last week, so calling India out on this kind of chokehold of Kashmir at the moment, which is useful. But again, I would press the point that, also there we have the opportunity to do some homework. And, we've been calling to the international community as kind of like calling, India's bluff and come and look at our side, and we aren't preparing military.
Saeed Mohammad Ali, I'll just get back to you on this. Let me put another question to Brigadier Tipu here. Now, sir, the abrogation of or abolishing of Article 370, do you think maybe the Indians did it in a hurry? Or if they did, it backfired, sir, because they did it right before the UNGA session, about 2 months prior to that, and actually the major issue of Pakistan became, or rather the focus was towards Kashmir, sir.
I think the Indian arrogance and seeking no reason extremist tendencies have long nurtured this idea. They wanted to amend their constitution written by Ambedkar, and a lot of people in India also spoke on that, because they said that this constitution should only be for Hindus. They did not do it in a hurry. They had a plan to do it. They wanted that majority in the lower and upper house to do that, to revoke that article. But Faisal, let me tell you that the freedom struggles and the yearning for against atrocities does not finish on revoking or invoking of articles. Although the Indians have taken a step which will be detrimental to their own Indian Union, but it does not finish the Kashmir problem. In fact, it aggravates it, it internationalizes it, and I think the Indians got it wrong. Many people think in India that they got it wrong. And one thing that was there in Imran Khan's speech was that it was a proactive speech. It was not a reactionary speech.
Approach was very correct.
It was absolutely very clear, in which he told the Western countries that you are intentionally getting and siphoning the money out of the poor countries through their
Corrupt leaders.
And that you should not be doing that. Morally, it is wrong. And he put a tremendous pressure on that. And I think if we follow that up, the morality that the Western countries talk about, and the human rights and cleanliness and truthfulness, and often accuse the third world, they've got a point here. Imran Khan has got a point which has got a megaton effect. And then he talked of Islamophobia, and the people were killed in New Zealand, they were killed in Europe, they were killed everywhere. In America, every now and then a person opens fire in the schools, in churches here and there, and start killing people.
Hotels, cinema halls, you name it.
No other, he's absolutely right.
Normal rage gets into.
Indeed. And he said that if the international community does not solve this problem, he threw a warning shot on them. He said he does not seek war, but if the convention war, if the shootings war starts, then sky is the limit. He gave an example of Czechoslovakia, where the Germans had to obliterate Czechoslovakia before invading Poland. And the Indians are much like the Germans, and they seek no reason, they seek no humanity. Imran Khan wanted to tell them that there is a humane angle. Lift the curfew, let the people decide their own fate. And he said that very forcefully and threw the ball right in the court of United Nations and international community. I think he has done a great job for Pakistan.
Chima Saab, if you remember, in one of the addresses, the President of USA, Donald Trump, very categorically mentioned that UN is a useless body. Remember, sir? And he said, well, since we give them 16%, or if they go against us, that was on the day when Jerusalem was declared as the capital of Israel, and they were talking about taking over Golan Heights and the other areas as well. So only I think 11 small states supported, few abstained, rest voted against USA, and this was the reaction, if you remember, from the ambassador or of the US in UN, right, sir? Now the lady is left, but what I'm saying is that particular issue was about it, right? Now UN is such a powerful body. We actually do not look up to UN, we actually look up to USA, most of the countries. If you have the US influence which supports you, you will get your deal done. If they don't, then keep on hanging in UN, sir.
Well, I think definitely we look at the U.S. because United States controls much of the agenda at the UN.
World Bank, IMF, you name it.
There's so many others. So I think all this entire institutional architecture which has been established after World War II, which has been mainly supported by United States and the West, that is why if we say that the China is trying to build an alternative institutional arrangement in terms of building Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, an equivalent to IMF and World Bank, so that the people can look towards that. So we call it that this is an institutional response to the Western institutional hegemony. The debate is very long, but I think at the end of the day, we have to look towards the United Nations. I think the only way, in my personal understanding, if we are saying that it is after 50 years we are speaking, the Security Council has spoken about Kashmir, and after 12 years the Europeans are talking about, European Union is talking about Kashmir. I think that is not their failure, that is our failure. We didn't discuss that Kashmir issue there. We should have never trusted on India. And we should have, even in the last, Faisal, in the last 18 years, we have been trying and convincing an apologetic attitude towards India. What Prime Minister Imran Khan is speaking about Islamophobia today, couldn't our leadership talk much more about this?
Not only our leadership of the rest of the 56 Muslim countries.
Yes, above all, we could have made this plot understood to everyone. These unfinished agendas like Kashmir and Palestine, they should be made them understand that what is a real plot. You know, if the problem, we didn't make them understand. And above all, the Muslims, above all the Muslim countries dominated by our Arab friends, they don't make the world understand because of their own personal and domestic compulsions, because of having a political system which is not that much transparent. So I think what matters at the moment, what Prime Minister Imran Khan is doing, if in 7 days there are 70 meetings as per we have been learned, so I think he's making a good mark. Last time when our prime ministers went there were not 70 meetings. It was even for 4 or 5 days, but there was not the wide range of meetings are being done. It is not just, the top leadership
and I
the
think,
prime
sir,
minister is meeting.
The expression matters more rather than the presence. You have to deliver your case. One important point which Khan Sahib raised was about this Islamophobia again, talking about 1.3 billion Muslims. And he said, well, on the behalf of those, this Islamophobia and everything, let's live collectively in harmony and peace, learn to live, the community living, the word which we normally use, that's the right approach. And then he also spoke about one thing very important, and that was about the guidance of the Prophet.
Yeah.
I think this issue has never been discussed before. Maybe a reference might have been made, but he did speak about the Prophet, peace be upon him. He did speak about him as that book was so powerful that personality was an example of that book. Whatever he did was exactly according to the guidelines of Quran, sir. So that is the perfect model to look up to. This is what Prime Minister today mentioned. And he says that whenever any Westerner, any writer, any cartoonist for that matter, or any other editor does something, you need to understand about our feelings. We really get hurt. I think this was also one of the major areas he touched upon.
I think this was all entirely an intellectual debate. It was not just a very ordinary discussion happening at the UNGA. It was entirely an intellectual debate, and Prime Minister made, at first time when we used to hear Prime Minister at home, when he used to speak about this money laundering and all these things, we used to consider that this is his personal agenda against the opposition. But he's motivated personally and convinced that all this money laundering, what is happening, this is because...
He talked about the tax-free heavens.
This is a crime. Why they?
Yeah.
So I think whatever he has spoken, I think that was all an intellectual agenda. He has made his point very clear. Nobody in Pakistani leadership, other than Prime Minister Bhutto, has directly targeted Indian leadership. We have given references to what India is doing, or If you just pick last 18 speeches at the UN, you will see every Pakistani leader is saying that we want to talk to India, we want a discussion, we want to talk with India, Kashmir should be issued bilaterally, United Nations should help, and so and so. But this time, he's talking, your social contract is breaking. India is a disfigured democracy. No, he is exposing what is happening. And above all, Faisal Saab, the only country that knows India from within is Pakistan. We have lived with them. No other country has lived with them. The Chinese don't understand. The Maldives doesn't understand. The Sri Lankans don't understand. The Europe, Asia, nobody understands them. We understand them and we can expose them. But for this, we need consistency. And for this, we need an approach on India. We need to expose
Consistent effort, sir.
Sir, and above all, sir, last point I will say, they are talking that this is Islamic terrorism. I think what needs to be made to the world understand this is Hindu religious extremism, which is making the case in Indian occupied Kashmir, and that is pushing Prime Minister Modi to do such kind of things. It is the RSS which is Hindu mindset, a Hindu extremist mindset, pushing the political party. We brought you here.
I'm
You are a
sure this
lifetime member.
RSS must have been Googled a lot. Now, coming to you, Alisa, first of all, sir, your take on this very important point of Islamophobia, because you live abroad and I'm sure you do face these problems every now and then. Do you think the Prime Minister was able to hit the target right in the bullseye, sir?
Well, Faisal, I mean, like I was trying to say before, I mean, with Islamophobia, I mean, there are in the West, I mean, of course, there are, people who have a much more simplistic worldview, but there are also people who are used to multiculturalism. And arguments have been made in the West that, when it comes to Islamophobia, some of this hatred can be compared to racism, which in multicultural countries is a serious issue, or anti-Semitism. In the way that the Muslim community is being targeted. So other voices also have been raising this concern. It's just that when Pakistan talks about Islamophobia, in the mind of the audience, immediately concerns start coming up vis-a-vis what does Pakistan do with its own minorities. So, we have to have a balanced view when we are thinking of how the world perceives us, is my first point. My second point is that, certainly, one acknowledges that, this is an important, obviously important and a crucial moment perhaps for Kashmir. And, there's some value in linking, unraveling the history of the RSS, etc. But rather than being complacent or overly congratulatory, about this, we also need to think what else is in our power, right? So rather than aggressive posturing only, because we know the disaster that can potentially lead to. And, the humanitarian angle, so fine, Alice Wells signals and says that, India now needs to lift, this chokehold over Kashmir, like I was saying. But also, if we are speaking, and the Prime Minister spoke to the Human Rights Commission at the UN, and it said that, come and look at our side of the border. We are not preparing militants, as India is suggesting. But I think we can do more. We can unilaterally allow access, and this is something the last time, we're speaking about this, I've said, and I've been writing about as well, that we have an opportunity to allow the Human Rights Council, when it does its next report, allow them access to Azad Kashmir. They try to be neutral. They say, Pakistan occupied Kashmir and India occupied Kashmir. And they have made some recommendations for Pakistan, which are by no means as hard to address as what's going on the Indian side. But to get moral high ground, we have to consider what those issues are. Take note of that report. And then have the courage and the honesty to say to those, human rights monitors that fine, come here, and that would glaringly show, that Pakistan has much less baggage, much less insecurity, and has a higher moral ground. And ultimately, thinking of the Kashmir problem not through the lens of our national interest, but really
Absolutely.
thinking of the Kashmir issue and its
It has to
potential
be seen
solution,
very neutrally.
vis-a-vis the Kashmiris themselves.
All right. Thank you very much, Saeed Mohammed Ali, for your comments. Now, last quick round, sir. And the question is that after the statement of Ms. Alice Wells, the Undersecretary of State for the South Asia, sir, the lady has actually raised all those concerns, not in detail, but she has thrown light on certain important issues. Now, sir, the point is that since we should not expect that India is going to retrieve its forces from the Kashmiri region, or for that matter, India is going to lift the curfew on ASAP basis. But sir, there are 2 points. There should be some sort of relaxation in the curfew. And the second is that the UN observers or the fact-finding missions should be allowed to go to Pakistani part of Kashmir, sir, which is Azad Kashmir, or the Indian IOK, sir.
I think India has been hiding behind certain factors. One is the world's mercantile interest in India, and then the hoax of their democracy and secularism, which is open. And Imran Khan's speech, I think, has ripped them open in the world. And this speech, when it comes from the heart, you look at the great speeches of the world, like I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King. And if you remember Ziaul-Haq's speech in Cairo, where he wanted the Egyptians to get back into the Arab League and convince the world there. And then even Obama, when he spoke in Al-Azhar before the establishment of the United States, got him to do other things. I think the speech which comes from the heart, it has its own strength. And you could see that Imran Khan was speaking his heart out, and he explained there's some kind of frustration to deal with the Indians, and they don't listen to reason, they don't listen to call of humanity, human rights, etc. The question that you asked is very pertinent. I don't think Indians will be in a hurry to obey Alice Wells unless the Americans behind the scenes exert some pressure. And the Americans can do that. If they are really sincere in getting India to have normalcy in the Indian occupied Kashmir, they can make the difference. And here lies your point, that what is the validity, what is the effectiveness of the United Nations. I think if you look at their performance, it is dismal at best, and the world leaders have been calling their own shots. And the United Nations were nowhere when the Americans invaded Iraq twice, when they started bombing the Syrians. Or when
Don't you remember General Colin Powell's, the way he presented the case of the weapons of mass destruction? Not even a single weapon was there. So they goofed up the world and they did what they did. Eventually, Tony Blair had said sorry, despite the fact that practically 1 million people marched on the roads in UK.
I think the Indians, but there is one fundamental difference, and that is that the Indians were going honky and dory, whatever they were doing in India. Now the going is going to be difficult for them.
So now the gag has been put, and I think we're going to check the horse soon. Your take, sir.
I think what the Prime Minister Imran Khan has taken an initiative at UNGA, all what I want a consistency Pakistan's policy. We only had this difficulty to make the world understand. I'm just looking, Prime Minister has given an interview to Christina Manpur at CNN. He's saying that I'm not going to meet Prime Minister Modi now, one thing. Second, she asked him that why the world is not understanding your issue about Kashmir, and he's replying that at 11 UN resolutions on Kashmir, the only thing we have to make our case understand time and again to the world is that there was a silence from Pakistani side because we wanted to talk with India and we put Kashmir little behind. So we wanted our bilateral relations to be normal. So I think we must not trust on India, and we must first keep this issue of Kashmir and a first agenda whenever we have to talk with India. Otherwise, there is not going to be any discussion.
Last quick comment. Do you think the Western media, in particular the US media, has given ample coverage to Prime Minister Khan?
I think, sir, Prime Minister Modi has got a bad press, and it's the Prime Minister Imran Khan who is getting a good press in West. And it has been not just, and above all, it's not just the Prime Minister Imran Khan has done an effort. The entire press is giving good press is talking good about Imran Khan's efforts. And Prime Minister Modi has not been even the British, American, French, European, every television, even giving a small time.
I'll just give you one thing. The commercials in the international press have gone skyrocketing high when they show Imran Khan.
I think that's
That-
you know,
You know what?
when you talk, he has the charisma, whether
He has
people admit it
Yeah.
or don't. People will think I'm just trying to praise the government and the Prime Minister here on the state TV.
Indeed.
The reality is the reality. Anyway, Priyas Saab, was a pleasure, sir,
Thank you.
talking to us and being here at this time, sir. So the
Thank
case
you.
is
Thank
with you.
you.
Shima Saab, was a pleasure to have you. So that's all we have for now. I'll see you after the weekend on Monday, inshallah. Till then, you take care of yourself. Have a great weekend and Khuda Hafiz from our side.